So I don't know if you remember this part. This is basically where I was just cutting the tops off. 2 barrels. So basically I just picked, I think I cut the top out of one and the bottom out of the other. And these barrels have no liner, no plastic liner, which is important if you get one that's carried food stuff. It's got a plastic liner inside that has to be burned out. In the case of these, they're just metal on the inside. I checked the hazmat on the glycol that were in these barrels before. It was nothing flammable or very toxic. You know, of course, you wouldn't want to ingest it. But anyway, I had no problem just cutting through these with a plasma torch. No flashback or anything like that. Nothing weird. Yeah, I've done the same thing with barrels that have carried motor oil. Also, the barrels that carry motor oil, they don't have a plastic liner inside either. So, I don't know. Do you remember this part? We carried these to the car wash.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, at this point, they still had a little bit of glycol in them. I'm sure the environmentalists would probably shut us down if they knew that we'd dumped part of this out in the... Do you remember the guy that was walking by, kind of checking on the place? Yeah, it kind of gave us a little bit of a scare.
I think that's good.
Yeah, we soaked these down, sprayed them as best as we could. I mean, I got in there at that bottom seam on the inside and just really hosed them down. This is just kind of spraying the outside, clean them up a little bit. I was hoping that would kind of remove a little bit of the flaky paint, but of course, stuck on a little bit more than I thought it was. A little bit of that paint kind of flaked off. Here's just really getting in that seam down at the bottom, get it sprayed out. Dried them out, just set them out in the sun. There was very little rust. This was about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago during the summer. Ball valve, I think that's a inch ball valve, inch pipe coupler, threaded pipe coupler. Now this piece here, I ended up not using that piece. That was going to be the chimney piece. Yeah, the sander disc kept getting gummed up. Probably not the safest thing in the world to be doing, but a little bit of alcohol in there does pretty good at kind of becoming a solvent agent for some of that paint. Really helps keep the sanding disc from getting gummed up. Really makes a big difference just having I haven't tried water, but just plain water may do almost as good as alcohol. Okay, this cut this sanding job just about in half. You know, a lot of folks burn these barrels, get the paint off. After building a couple of these smokers, might not be a terrible thing to think about doing, burning that paint off. It's a job getting it off. Here, just setting up some sawhorses to get that barrel up. That sawhorse ended up opening up on me, and barrel kind of slid down in between them. Just got a little heat gun, trying to get that sticker off. Tell you, a little heat on a sticker really does the trick. You remember taking a sticker off of that one?
Yeah.
I think you got the next one. And it came off pretty easy. Yeah, here you go with a heat gun.
Mm-hmm.
Start peeling it.
You see that little sticker stretching there? It comes off pretty easy. Boy, you try to peel one of those things when they're
You can stop it.
when they're not hot like we got them. It's a job. These are zinc. That coupler's zinc. I don't like welding zinc. I've got kind of sick from welding that mess before, so I try to take as much of that off as I can with a grinder. When it heats up, when you weld it, as some of you probably know, it releases some toxic fumes. So I've breathed so much of that in my life. I no telling what kind of brain damage I've got. It's just plasma cutting a hole in here. I ended up kind of getting a little bit wide on this hole, so I had to fill in with a lot of weld. Just kind of getting rid of the paint so I get a halfway decent bond.
All right, going.
Trying to get that thing just stuck out there straight before I get the other side tacked. It ain't pretty, but it ain't going anywhere. It was pretty good weld. It kind of a little burn through on the other side. Now I'm still running this smoker. I've still got this 1-inch ball valve, and that supplies all the air to the charcoal from underneath. And it looks almost undersized, but that 1 inch, that's all you need. Now here I'm laying out the door openings that are going to go. I got 2 doors. I forget exactly what the measurements are here, but you can probably look at the difference between these 2 markings, kind of figure out how big that door is. Second one I made, I just kind of copied the first. And I just kind of guessed at this. This is probably, I think, the 3rd one that's been made. My brother kind of developed this smoker, and I kind of took it and ran with it a little bit. And they're basically, between his and mine, are about the same. I reinforced my doors a little bit. You'll see that coming up here in a minute. And that tape, that straight edge you see there that's bent, just a $10 straight edge from, I think I got it from Lowe's Hardware 10 or 15 years ago. I just sort of bent it to the barrel, and I just kind of dedicated it. I built 2 of these and got several folks that are kind of wanting one. I don't typically do a lot of work for other people unless I'm kind of friendly with them. And typically, if I'm doing something for a friend, I don't charge them. I just give it to them.
Kind of come on this side so you can see the cut.
Son's taking the video here. I'm talking to him about kind of getting close up and trying to get some angles. We've had this footage for a little over a year now. Been meaning to kind of get it together, but I didn't really know about how to edit a video, and so just starting to kind of figure out how all this stuff works. There's 2 cut lines. That plasma cutter does pretty good on the thin material. I think it's rated for, I want to say, up to a 1/2 inch or somewhere close to that. But it definitely does better with the sheet metal stuff. Here we are bending some, I think I picked this stuff up from Lowe's or Home Depot, just some 1/8 inch by 1 inch flat stock. I'm just doing a lot of hand bending, kind of getting the little kinks worked out. You can see that bottom bottom edge there doesn't quite contour. So I put it back in the bender, kind of worked on a little bit, got it kind of contoured. You remember welding on this project a little bit?
Yeah.
Here's kind of back in the bender, just making some last minute little tweaks. Now we got it laying pretty good, but that bottom edge is still sticking out a little bit. So it'll go back in the bender. I'll probably work up about 3 inches from where that's not meeting, bend that down a little bit. Just easy does it when you're bending that stuff. Just a little tweak goes a long way. There's that pretty much fitting the contour. You know, it's not 100% perfect. But once I got it where it was kind of in the realm of acceptability, I threw some tacks down on it. I think I started to go up towards that middle section, start welding that. But I think I eventually just ended up starting at the bottom and kind of working up towards the top end of that. Some of that paint was a little bit hard to kind of weld through. I had to kind of get it warm, kind of start that weld on the metal side and then kind of cut over to the paint. Or cut over to the painted side, I should say.
Alright, you can stop it.
Now, keep in mind this barrel, the left side of that barrel is sort of going to be the lower section. The right side is going to be the upper section, if you're wondering how those hinges go on. Now, this door contoured pretty good.
Get a close-up of the hinges.
You can see those hinges.
Good. Pan on over here to this side.
I had a little gap here,
Gap
and
right
I noticed
here.
when I pressed on that
Close
door, that gap closed up. So I
will
figured
close
I'd
up. We're gonna put a piece of metal over that.
maybe get a type of shackle latch that would
Alright.
pull that door in. Went to the hardware store, looked at several different little latches. I could have probably used those and probably should have, but I figured I'd just design, a custom latch, being that I was already so deep into this. And I kind of wanted that custom look to something kind of unique that maybe you just didn't see anybody else have. And, the smoker, I've never seen another one like it. I've seen the ugly drum smokers, but my brother Joey designed this smoker probably about 15 years ago. And he's had several different little variations of it, but he threw this together one day, and I don't know how many hundreds of pounds of meat that has been through this thing that he's made. Pretty incredible smoker, to be honest with you. It cooks at a real even temperature. Yeah, so just drilled a couple holes through those bolts. This is 1-inch square tubing. And I just cut 2 channels down it. I took a plasma cutter across to cut those chunks out there. You can see the plasma cutter didn't do an amazing job. Of course, I think I free-handed that. I probably could have used a straight edge, but at this point it was late. I was just trying to get through these things, and I didn't particularly care how amazing these things looked at this hour of the night. I was just trying to get this thing done. So I plunged through top and bottom, and you'll see kind of how this thing goes together. I had the old Army can with a latch, and I studied that latch, kind of a cam over latch. Just studied a little bit, try to figure out how I was going to get one to kind of cam. And this is kind of what I came up with. So that pin's going all the way through. Of course, you'll see here in a minute the other side of it. So I just put a piece of round stock in there, and I ended up just kind of tack welding a little bit of a button on each end of that. Now this is the other end of it, and you'll see how that kind of goes together. A little hard to explain, but you probably pause that and study that hinge a little bit and kind of tell how it goes together there. It was late and I didn't have time to film all of the latch portion of the build. Just mention in the comments, and I'll send you an email or a private message kind of explaining a little bit more of the detail of those latches. Now here I'm cutting out some expanded metal for the shelves, 2 shelves, and you'll see I build this shelf portion kind of upside down. I'll make a little bit more sense here in a minute. So that was one of the cutouts that I cut out of the barrel, and I just used it as a general template, and it fit in there pretty good. I had to kind of bend it a little bit to kind of get it through the opening of the barrel, but and I think I actually undercut those a little bit. I think where I marked, I cut about 1/8 of an inch inside of that mark. You can see those door openings. I just wanted to reinforce those, so I put some 1/8 inch bar stock on either side of those doors just to give it a little bit more rigidity where those hinges were going to pull together. Yeah, and you see it goes in there pretty good. It gets hung up a little bit. I had to kind of articulate it. So this is the second, and again, this is upside down right now. Those 2 doors will eventually be at the very top. This is a 1/2 inch square tubing, and it doesn't have to be anything substantial, probably 16 gauge, I imagine maybe 12 or 16 gauge. Everything was pretty much eyeballed here. I just kind of got the general angle, and I cut 4 of these pieces together so they were relatively uniform. Just cut angles there. Here you see just tacking it in. Watch your eyes. trying to make sure that I got the height right. I wanted those pieces of expanded metal to set nice and level without kind of rocking back and forth. So again, all this was just eyeballed. I used that contour in the barrel there, just on both of those rings as just kind of a guide at where I was going to put those cross members. I guess corrugation is probably the correct word there that I was looking for. I think this was the next day. I believe the majority of the upper section of this thing took about a day and a half to make. And I believe that first day, we got a little bit of a late start. I believe that was around noon when we started cutting those barrels. Now the angle looked odd there, but my eyeball, those were as close to parallel as I could get them. And I think that was just a little bit of parallax from the camera angle there. But there's nothing I hate more than just looking down on something, seeing shoddy work. So that shot kind of concerned me a little bit. I wondered if my eyeball was out that bad. Either that or maybe I had one too many beers that night. Here it is. Top section's basically complete. Now that smokestack you see coming out the top there, I ended up replacing that with a piece of 3-inch tubing with a shutoff valve. Yeah, you can see the welds on that, isn't the prettiest thing in the world. Now here it is. I didn't film the section how this thing pivots and opens, but I'll do a follow-up video on that because I ended up kind of changing the design on how this thing hinges, and I didn't really like the way I had this thing attached, so I didn't want to include that in the video. But basically it's a piece of black iron pipe that runs up from the bottom barrel all the way up to the top. One thing I like about this smoker is you don't have to bend over to get your work the grates there. Everything's up nice and tall. You're putting your briskets in. You're not having to hunch over to pull anything out, put anything in. Now here's the lower section inner wall. And what we did, we took, I think it was, I forget what thickness this steel was, but it was probably 28 gauge or thinner. Nothing too substantial, just sheet metal, essentially. And I just rolled it in a tube, and then I took one of the tops that I cut off a barrel and just welded it onto the bottom of that tube. So it measures exactly what the cutout was on the barrel there. Now, my concern was I wasn't going to be able to get it back in the barrel unless I nibbled some off the edge. So you'll see here in a minute, I take a plasma cutter and I think I took a good 1/4 inch off all sides. Now the top of this thing's measuring about 19.5 inches across. Again, just kind of use my alcohol method here to kind of remove this. I don't think it's in the picture, but I ended up putting some alcohol in here, and oh man, this was still a job. It took 15-20 minutes to get all that paint off. I just set up a magnet on my little bandsaw as a stop so I could cut 3 evenly sized legs here. I could have marked them, but I'm kind of lazy like this. Try to come up with little tricks for making my life a little easier. There's the alcohol again, just kind of finishing up. The sanding, kind of getting rid of most of that metal there, or most of the paint down to bare metal. And that's about it for the sanding. Here's plasma cutter just nibbling off a little bit so I could get this thing stuck back down in the barrel. Now keep in mind, this is not the barrel, this is just a piece of rolled steel. And it wasn't anything to roll it, we didn't really bend it, we just rolled it in a tube. I put a couple clamps on it and a couple tack welds, and then we threw this bottom on. My son's doing a little bit of welding here. He's learning, but he's doing pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this one you tacked from the back side. I didn't want to say anything at the time, but you totally missed the target on that one.
Yeah.
Right here. And I forget what I said to you. I was like, "That's good, bud." I told you to get your angle a little bit better, and you hit it pretty good here. I was hoping you'd hold down that trigger a little bit longer. But this is after I'd warned you that metal's a little thinner, and it's real easy to kind of blow through this metal here. Get it too hot, it'll just make a big hole. A lot of times that's more work than it is just putting a series of little tacks here. And these legs aren't going to take a lot of lateral stress, so I wasn't real worried about it. The main thing was just to get them tacked on pretty good. I think after you hit this, I think I looked at them and I was pretty happy. I don't think I put any more metal down on them. I think I was pretty happy with it. And after about the third one, you were doing a lot better here, and I just rotated that barrel around and let you tack all those down.
Mm-hmm.
Need to get some smaller gloves for you. Them gloves were a little bigger than you could handle there, but
All right, pretty good.
Can't have everything.
No.
You do have your own helmet now.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's me.
Little fist bump from my man. Pretty proud of this little guy. So you can see that metal's nothing substantial, and it doesn't have to be. This is basically just acting as a heat ring to kind of keep some of that heat from the charcoal inside the smoker.
There we are.
Now I ended up going with a kind of a 3-walled thing here. You'll see we'll make another little tube here. I think it's not necessary after building the second one. All we basically ended up with on the second one was what you're looking at here, plus the burn basket. Now the air inlet, I had to cut through that piece that we just made, that tube that we just welded the legs onto. So I stuck it down in there and then marked this so I could get a hole cut for air. And again, this is the only air coming into this thing. And that's part of what makes it work so good, is it's just always on the edge of barely not having enough air.
You ready?
Yep.
And that's all it is there, probably about a 1-inch hole. Put this thing back down in there, and I had to get these aligned. Now I cut out a little bit for that piece of coupler that I'd welded through the bottom so it would clear. And I got those holes aligned where the air's coming straight in. I just cut a ring. I forget how I did this, how I marked that out, but I didn't know exactly where I was going to put that ring. Initially, I was going to drop it down in that void there on top of that drum that we'd made. But it didn't work out the way I was thinking it would. Here I'm just doing some redneck marking here. I learned this from my brother years ago, working in NASCAR country. I think we were building Kyle Petty's cars. And my brother showed me this one day. You just take your measurement. I wanted 2 inches here. I put one finger on the 2-inch mark and then put your pencil at the end of that tape measure. And it does pretty good, unless you're looking for something more precise. And again, just plasma cut through this. It's nothing pretty. Of course, I wasn't really worried about pretty too much. Just main thing is I was kind of craving barbecue and decided to make one of these things. And I looked at, I think, a Traeger and some other grills are quite expensive, and I didn't really like the quality of some of the material. I'm sure they're great smokers, and I'm sure they do a great job. And I'm talking about quality, and I'm sitting here talking about a 55-gallon drum, but So initially I put this thing down on that first drum that we'd made, but I ended up deciding I didn't have anything to really weld it to, and I couldn't get back in there to tack it. So this is more like my brother's design on his first one. I think he's got a ring just like this on the top of his. And he'd sent me some old pictures he had of it. And this thing is probably 10 years old. But it's still working.
Right.
Alright, so look at this.
And so I come up with the idea of just cutting a sleeve to go in there and kind of connect those two together. Now that lower weld was pretty easy.
Alright, you gonna stop it?
But I wanted this thing to be locked in case I ever moved or rolled this drum smoker. I didn't want that whole bottom part shifting around. And that air gap in between is really just the insulator that keeps that outside of the drum from getting so hot where that burn basket is. I wanted equal spacing all the way around that thing, so I ended up tacking it there at the bottom where you're seeing, and ended up coming up above that, tacking in that corner up there, and that proved a little bit more difficult just because I couldn't get in there and see, where I was tacking. So I got a few holes I kind of blew through there, and I had to go in there and kind of work some tacks to kind of get those closed back in because I wanted it as airtight as I could get it in there. Now this is also thinner metal here. It's the same material.
Over to here,
Yeah.
and we're gonna tack weld that.
I think it's
tack weld
28
this inside
gauge.
first. So we'll tack weld that all the way down.
And this was that inner ring, and I wanted a little bit more of a heat reflector.
Boom.
This is going to go just outside the burn basket itself, which is going to be constructed of a heavier gauge steel. But again, this is the part that I was talking about earlier. I don't think this piece is necessary. Now it's still in my smoker, but I built one for a buddy. Didn't put this in there, and his runs just about as cool on the bottom outside to the touch is what I'm talking about, as mine does. So again, I think this is a little unnecessary, but I was kind of engineering in my head and kind of thinking about what that conductive and radiation properties were going to be like coming off of that bed of hot coals, and I probably went a little overboard. But anyway, it's in there, it works. It probably runs maybe a little cooler, but if it's any at all, it's not really recognizable. And that's pretty much it. I ended up cutting an air vent hole in this one as well. It just sits in that other ring that I made, and then the burn basket sits inside of this. Now here comes the burn basket. I don't have a roller, and I'd like to have one, but even working in NASCAR stuff, I've bent a lot of stuff over my knee, and I've bent a lot of stuff just using little stuff that's kind of laying around the shop. Now, I built this table 5 or 6 years ago, and I built it pretty beefy and didn't really intend it to be used as a metal bender, but I was kind of eyeballing different stuff around the shop, and that caught my eye. And I thought, hey, I could sleeve that down in between those two pieces of steel and kind of bend that thing over, and it worked pretty good. Second one I made, it didn't go quite as well. I had a time getting that stuff bent over into a round burn basket, but we kind of hit a home run this night.
And this end too.
One thing I've learned about bending this, and my brothers taught me this, when you're pulling down on that metal, I'm being very careful not to pull to one side or the other. You start pulling to one side, even just a little bit, when this tube comes together, it won't meet. And there just about ain't no way to get it fixed unless you're just an absolute metal genius, which I'm not. And we worked and worked at this. I've removed a couple clips, I think, of me sitting on top of this thing and bouncing around. But this last little bit of tweaking is really the hard part. This thing ends up going back into that bender several times, even after this shot right here. It goes back in that bender. A little bit of hand tweaking. I think we probably spent 15-20 minutes bending this. And you can see the bottom is resting on the ground pretty evenly, which means I've done a relatively okay job at not torquing that thing left or right. Again, just being very cognizant of how much pressure I'm putting on each side. Goes back in that bender. I just need to tweak that. And that far edge there. Another thing, when you put it in a bender, anytime you put something in there, if you don't put it in evenly and you pull down, even if you're pulling evenly, it'll sort of tweak it where those sides don't come together. Those ends don't come together quite right. I'll put a couple clamps on here, and then I'll throw some welds on it. Heavier gauge steel, so I'm turning that power up a little bit on that welder. Just putting some tacks, that way I can release these C-clamps. You get one tack there in the end. I think that other end, I didn't quite have room. That clamp came right over to the edge. I didn't want to weld my clamps up to the base metal, so at this point, it's not going anywhere. And there it is all together. Now the burn basket is going to have a bottom itself. And the whole reason for this bottom that I'm putting on here, again, this is just one of the bottom of this is a top that I'd cut off from one of those barrels. I think actually this was the top. It's got a bum opening in it. There it is there. So that's the bung opening. And I just sort of cut around it. Now the reason I wanted a bottom in this is I didn't want my ashes falling down in that larger part of that drum, and then I'd have to go in there and clean those out. So I don't know what you'd call this, a false bottom maybe. Well, it's a bottom. When I take this basket out and it's got an inch or two of ash in the bottom, I just turn it upside down and dump it out. And the ash I end up putting a piece of expanded metal in here to hold the charcoal above these cross grates that we're putting in. But that ash pours through that expanded metal pretty good. I've never had a problem. Just a couple little bangs and whack it with the side of my hand, and all that ash just comes pouring out. Here's my son back in there again welding. And I told him, I said, you can pull that trigger and not let up. Some pretty heavy gauge steel he's not going to burn through. And he did really good at this. He got some good hot welds in there. I was pretty proud of him. I wish I'd lined those cross members up with that seam on the side, but I wasn't thinking at the time. Here goes the expanded metal that I'm going to drop inside. And so I'm making this mark, and then I end up cutting about an 1/8 inch inside of that mark.
That should be good.
It still wasn't quite enough. That thing didn't want to go down in there, but little redneck ingenuity, we figured it out. I think part of my son's boot was the reason that thing actually got in there. Some reason we were doing thumbs up this night. We had some thumbs down. We were kind of burning the midnight oil here.
Drill a hole.
Tired and ready to get it over with. And my son cutting a hole in the side. There's me cutting one as well. You'll see how these two kind of line up. And then there's that ring, that extra protective ring that I said you probably don't need. That air comes in through the side and goes right in below those coals. That whole burn basket will be full of coals there.
My thumb down there.
Now I'm using lump charcoal. That's all I've ever ran in this thing. And I've ran the good stuff and I've ran the bad stuff. I've run the Walmart charcoal and I've ran some good expensive charcoal. And I can tell a little bit of difference. I prefer the premium stuff, but to be honest with you, most of the time I'm getting brisket at Sam's Club and I'm probably getting my charcoal from Walmart. Yeah, bent my table a little bit there. We had to find a different approach. Again, this is where we bent that heavier gauge steel for that burn basket, and it held up pretty good. It's pretty heavy. 1/4 inch closest to me, and then I got a 1 inch piece of square tubing. And you can see it flex there a little bit, but I didn't damage anything. And I'm just putting some ears on this handle here. This handle basically lives a life inside charcoal. When that charcoal burns down, this handle just kind of falls like you see it there, down into the charcoal. And it's never bent. It's never been an issue. I think that's probably, I want to say it's probably at least 1/4 inch or heavier. Actually, it's probably 3/8 now that I think about it. I ended up putting 5/8 bar stock on the second burn basket I made, and by not having that inner ring, the second smoker I made actually has a bigger burn basket. Both of these burn baskets, the original smoker and the second one I made, will hold a substantial amount of lump charcoal. And I think this particular one will hold about, if I'm not mistaken, I think this one will hold about 15 pounds of charcoal slightly mounded on the top. If not, somewhere very close to that. The second one I made will handle a little bit more than that. Here I'm just welding some little
Don't look with your own eyes.
buttons on the end just to keep that handle from kind of pulling through the hole. And probably a little bit bigger button than I actually probably needed there, but I didn't want the thing coming off. And if you like this video, let me know. I'll try to get some more content together, particularly a brisket cook that'll be coming up in the near future. We normally do about a 10-hour cook from start to finish. Smoker has the capability of going 14 to 16 hours, depending on how much charcoal you put in it. Good thing about this smoker is it does have the ability with that ball valve just to shut it down. And so any unused charcoal in there, you're pretty much going to have that available for your next cook. So it definitely kind of saves you some money being able to shut that cooking process down and preserve that leftover charcoal for the next one.
Can I open these? I just
Hope you liked the video again. Hope to have more content coming soon. Thanks.